Director McGallis.
Here.
We have a quorum of 8 present with no absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Higgins, Hobson, Pang, Ross, Totten, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you. Item number 2 is approval of minutes from the meeting held on November 17, 2016 and November 30th, 2016. Any questions or comments? We have a motion to approve. Motion by Director Lewis, second by Director Melvin. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Buchanan?
Aye.
Director Colson? Yes. Director DeWitt? Aye. Director Lewis?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Aye.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you. Item 3A is a report on the monthly financial results for October 2016. B.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members.
Morning.
Joining me today is Eva De Laurentiis, one of our principal financial analysts. And you also received the report for the regional financial summary for October. I will be giving you a little summary here. So we're reviewing the year-to-date financial results through October. In general, favorable expense results continue to offset unfavorable operating revenue. The size of the Chicago area labor force decreased by about 9,000 in October, and employment declined by nearly 20,000 jobs. This resulted in an increase in the regional unemployment rate to 5.6%, while the national unemployment rate held steady at 4.9%. So let's look at ridership here. Current year-to-date system ridership is 3.6% lower than budget, as shown by the orange bars on the chart. October ridership decreased by 5.9% compared to 2015. Unfortunately, the Cubs playoff games were not enough to offset the base ridership losses we had been experienced. But keep in mind that the rally was not until November, so it's not reflected here. For the year-to-date, the RTA system ridership is down 3.3 versus 2015. Again, low gas prices continue to affect ridership, as does the car sharing programs. Looking at the ridership summary, all of the service boards continue to see ridership results below budgeted levels. As indicated by the red boxes, CTA ridership was 3.9% unfavorable to budget. Bus ridership for CTA was down 5.4% year-to-date relative to budget. Rail ridership on CTA was down 2.1% year-to-date relative to budget, and both bus and rail ridership were also lower than in 2015. Looking at PACE, ridership was 4% below budget, and 88 paratransit ridership was 5.3% under budget. For October 2016, the average price of gas was $2.33 per gallon compared to $2.77 per gallon in October of 2015. So the lower gas prices continue to impact on a national and local ridership results. Let's look at operating revenue. So it was $9.2 million or 1% unfavorable to budget, primarily due to unfavorable fare revenue and the 50% lower level of state reduced fare reimbursement, which was provided to the service boards by the state fiscal year 2016 budget. PACE suburban service operating revenue was 9.1% unfavorable, highlighted in red, due to the shortfall in reduced fare reimbursement, compounded by lower than budgeted investment and passenger revenue results. 88 paratransit was 13% unfavorable due to lower passenger revenue and delayed Medicaid reimbursements, which come in ebbs and flows. Look at the public funding section on the dashboard below. We show a slightly unfavorable result for Metro and PACE suburban service due to slightly unfavorable sales tax. PACE ADA was funded at budget, while CTA had a favorable variance of 3.7%, which was due to the strong real estate transfer tax receipts and positive sales tax. So sales tax is a little bit stronger in the city than it is in the outer areas. October results include projected sales tax through September 2016, which declined by 0.2% compared to September of 2015. Now looking at expenses, through October, they were $55.8 million or 2.5% favorable to budget, with each service board reporting favorable results for both the month of October and year-to-date. As we've reported previously, roughly a third of this favorable variance is attributable to the lower fuel prices. Fuel savings total $20.6 million for the system year-to-date. Metro reported favorable expenses of 3.1% compared to budget, which is highlighted in the light blue. This was due primarily to operation savings of $3.2 million and claimant insurance savings of $3.1 million. Fuel savings for Metro was $9.4 million. Pace Suburban Service had a 6.6 favorable budget expense, highlighted in light blue, again due primarily to fuel savings of $6.1 million, along with favorable results in the operations and administration expense categories. ADA Paratransit 9.2 favorable expense is being driven by lower fuel cost and then their lower cost of public transportation savings of $11.5 million. And again, PACE continues to see lower costs due to their improved provider transportation contracts. At the regional level, favorable operating expenses and public funding more than offset the unfavorable operating revenue, producing a year-to-date result which was $67.1 million favorable to budget, a $5.8 million improvement from last month's report. Metro, Pace, Suburban Service, and ADA Paratransit each have favorable net result variances of more than 3%, highlighted in light blue, due to good expense performance. Metro recorded a favorable recovery ratio of 2.5 percentage points year-to-date, while CTA Pace and Pace ADA were just slightly unfavorable to budget. So looking at the fare recovery ratio, 37.7 includes passenger fare revenues only, and it's a slight increase of 0.1% over last month's report. This would be like the pure recovery ratio. When ancillary service board revenue is included, things like lease, land sales, concession space, the recovery ratio increases to 41.1% through October, and that's all revenue. In the right section, we show the statutory recovery ratio, which is with credits, and compared to budget. This stood at 51.5 through October, 1 percentage point favorable to budget, again due to the favorable expenses reported by each service board. So in summary, the expenses continue to perform well, while operating revenue and ridership remains below budgeted levels. As part of the budget presentation, we will have a short discussion about recovery ratio and our conversations with the service boards. But I can tell you that while ridership continues to decline, the service boards are being very proactive of containing their expenses so that they can meet the recovery ratios to date, and we'll continue to monitor the situation.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Anybody? Yes, Director Hobson.
In terms of the surpluses at the varying service boards, how are those allocated? Do we have any idea? Is it just fund money that they throw Christmas parties, or is it something that they allocate?
I'm sorry, what item were you asking about?
In terms of surpluses, in terms of net results?
Oh, no. There's very clear direction on the use of PBV, positive budget variance. It is for capital, and that's what they're asked to do.
Answers my question.
Now, they could
Thanks.
come to the board and request, a change of that for one-time emergencies. For example, during the 2008 situation, obviously, there were other concerns at that time than capital. They were just trying to meet operating money. But should there be any PVVs, it goes to capital.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll move on to item 3B, which is the semi-annual report on project management oversight. And Violet.
So Violet Gergel Gunka will be presenting our project management oversight report. As you know, this is a semi-annual report. Oh, you want me to work it for you? Or you want me to do it? This is a semi-annual report. New to this report, we report on all the active projects that meet certain criteria, but we also added a new slide in here, and it's also in your report that you received a couple of weeks ago, where we show the inactive projects due to state funding delays that have not been started, because we thought we weren't giving you a complete picture. We're just reporting on what's active. We do identify active projects that are delayed because of state funding, but we've also now added those that have not been started. They weren't shovel ready when we worked very closely with IDOT to identify those that had to move forward, taking priority, because there would have been, there were certain criteria where they started, where there's security issues, anything like that. So Violet will present that report now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning.
Morning.
Today, I'm happy to present the current report on project management oversight. We last presented on PMO in June 2016. You received the PMO report as part of your board briefing, and it includes details for every project. The report was designed to make it straightforward for our board to easily see progress, issues, and risks for the transit capital projects in the region. The program currently includes oversight of all state-funded transit projects, regardless of budget, and all other projects with budgets of $10 million or more, regardless of funding source. Together, this set of projects for the current reporting period represents $3.7 billion. Please note that the 2015 and 2016 capital programs do not include any state funding, so the state-funded projects in this report are part of prior year's programs. As a bit of a background, RTA implements the PMO program pursuant to Section 2.01B of the RTA Act. RTA is required to oversee the Service Board's capital programs and expenditures. PMO is part of RTA's fulfillment of this requirement. Specific involvement includes direct reports and meetings with Service Board project teams, attendance at other project meetings, project site visits, and periodic reporting to the Illinois Department of Transportation. RTA PMO staff is augmented by engineering and project management consultants who provide necessary expertise as well as additional staff resources. As of the current reporting period, all projects are either on budget or under budget. Details are included in the PMO report. If project delays caused solely by the lack of state funding are excluded, 81% of projects are on schedule. 4 projects are behind schedule. Details are included in the PMO report. However, if we include uncertainty of state capital funding as a cause of project delay, 9 more projects are behind schedule, making for more than half of our state-funded projects to have fallen behind. There are 5 METRA and 4 PACE projects that are delayed due to the uncertainty of state funding. 8 of these projects are on hold. One of the PACE's projects is now proceeding with a delay. There are 20 projects that have never started and have been placed on hold due to the lack of state funding. These projects are not detailed in the PMO report since they were not active at the time when the state funding delays went into effect. The change order amounts represent cumulative totals for the currently ongoing state-funded projects, and 81% of the region's projects are without change orders. The vast majority of extra cost for change orders has been for added value to the project. The total cost of change orders represents 1% of the overall budget for the state-funded projects. Selected project highlights include CTA's Wilson Transfer Station project, which remains on schedule and within budget. The project is currently in Phase 4, which includes Track 3 reconstruction, demolition of the old East platform, and construction of the new East station and platform. Metro continues to make progress on the positive train control implementation with both rolling stock and wayside installations, as well as system development. PACE has been procuring additional over-the-road buses for its bus-on-shoulder service. The 5-year contract allows flexibility for PACE to procure up to 50 buses. 22 buses have been placed in service. An order for additional 5 buses has been executed. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Of course, we experienced the same last year, and that was with the state funding not being for some of the projects available, so that had an impact on us, but 81% on schedule without that. I think that's pretty good compared to the past years. The one thing I was wondering, we always are looking at our peer group. They all have projects out. They're all confronted with the same kind of thing. What percent on time should it be? As far as our project list, should it be 90% as a goal, or what would be the norm?
We haven't really done that comparison, but we strive for high numbers. The delays that are there, they're very minor. So one project is only delayed by a month. The 95th station project is delayed by 3 months, and the contractor is working on a recovery schedule. So I think at the last report, there were only 2 behind, and I'm confident that at least a couple of them we can make up because they're very short, and over the length of the project, we can make that up. So overall, I think it's really good.
And of course, not having cost overruns on the projects, I think that's something to really be pleased with. Director Hobson.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you very much for the detailed report that you provided. It was excellent in terms of my ability to understand the status of each project, so thank you very much for that. Do you have any idea what the cost for the state-related delays are? How much that's costing these particular projects?
Well, we don't have, I would say, a detailed, by project, but one of the things that happened a couple of years ago is the service boards, their capital groups, and their finance people, along with the RTA, met with the Illinois Department of Transportation, and they really were very engaged in establishing criteria on what projects were going to be prioritized and funded first, taking into consideration those that were, holes in the ground and in place and active. Likewise, where contractors were on board, where they were going to incur additional costs for delaying the project. So those moved to the front, and the service boards had to prove up what stages they were in the projects. So very thoughtful consideration was, I'm not saying there aren't costs incurred, of course there are, but anytime you delay, there's usually some type of cost, but there was very thoughtful consideration given to what projects would move forward. So those that were further along were funded, and those that were not were just put on hold. So when these projects were started, the service board started them with active, committed agreements from the state, or they wouldn't have started them. That said, we did receive assurances from IDOT that those commitments would be honored, but that there were delays. So while I'm sure there are expenses associated with delays, there was a lot of consideration given to which ones to move forward, to not incur, security costs, watching over a construction site that's half started. We'll see. We have to have the rest of that money come through so that these projects can be completed. Anything to add? Or?
The only other thing that I would add is that we have weekly conversations with IDOT to try to move some more of these projects forward.
So it sounds like there's at least some good coordination and some thoughtful effort to minimize costs on the staff level between RTA service boards and IDOT. I guess this question goes to Chairman Dillard. How do the representatives understand that the delays in state funding cause the service board and the projects to incur additional costs? Is that message getting through?
I think so. Jeremy talks to them more than I do. And in fact, one of the suggestions I have, Director Hobson, to you, Jeremy, is I think you should take the list of delays, just do a very polite cover letter to whatever senator and representative represent those areas, just saying, as the state moves forward, hopefully on a capital bill, you should know that a project in your district or projects in your district, see the attached list, are being delayed. I think most of the members, when I see them, I always tell them, and I kind of give them the $1.5 million, $2 million, our cost of short-term borrowing. I give them that number. But on projects, let's make sure when we're seeing them, and Leanne goes to Springfield as well, that we say there is some cost to delaying these projects.
Yeah, we'll do that, and we have in the past updated them with that list, and we'll continue to update them with that list so they're aware.
And I know I saw the Healy station jump out. The appropriations chairman of the House Transportation Appropriations Committee, the Healy station's in his district, and he and I have talked about that at least 15 times. So the chairman of the House Appropriations Transportation Committee clearly gets it and is trying to help. and trying to help us with Governor Rauner's office. And I will say, while I have frustrations as a citizen with the budgetary process of the state, one area where we've had, I think, excellent cooperation, as Jill and Bee pointed out, is really on these capital projects. Our staff and IDOT's communication have been very good in coordinating the projects that are really ready to go. So that line of communication was pretty good, I think.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Director DeWitt. Oh, Director Ferga.
I have a question on page 63. I'm sorry. Thought I had it on. There's a budget of $167,000. And the second item is the purchase of 40-foot compressed natural gas buses. There's a budget of $119 million. Those are for the total amount of buses. Are they not for 416 for the 40-foot fixed route buses and 250 of the compressed natural gas?
Yes, this would be for the maximum contract allowed. So these for like the CNG buses, only 91 are funded right now, which is the state-funded part. So
the individual cost of the buses would be that number divided by 416.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just above the Healy Station in the list of metro projects is the Union Pacific West Line expansion, which has been talked about for quite some time. Is this item added to this list from the standpoint of hardline construction delay, or can we assume that the federal dollars that have been appropriated for part of this study, the cost-benefit analysis study being done by Metra, is that still moving forward? Did I confuse you? I may not have asked that very well. Is it hard dollar construction that's being delayed, or is the study process being delayed, I guess is the question.
This would be for the construction part, and it's a 50-50 split with Union Pacific. So RTA, the state money is partially funding some of that, so and it's the construction part.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Director Ross.
I have a process question that's not directly related to this report, but when the service boards bid these capital projects, at what point does our staff see final documents, or do we see final documents prior to the implementation of a project?
Yes, there's a very active grant process that either goes through the state or depending on the funding source, right? So through the capital group, there's a very formal process whereby these funds get requested and awarded. Further, once reimbursements start being executed related to that project, so there's this commitment, there's signed agreements, that's all in place. They, of course, have to follow procurement requirements as dictated by the funding source, federal, state, local, whatever it is. Once that's all done and it's all, meets the requirements, there's a review process for the reimbursements. They start flowing in from the service boards into, again, the capital group, reviewed, approved, they go through a sign-off process. Those reimbursements then get sent off to the state. They go through a similar process there. Once reimbursement flows back, then the service boards get paid. Does that answer the question?
It does.
Okay.
It does. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, we'll go on to item 4A, which is an ordinance authorizing the quarterly capital amendment for the fourth quarter 2016. Jill.
The arrow here.
Oh, good morning. I'm going to turn this over to Dave Spacek, who is the capital manager.
Great. Dave.
Good morning, Chair Megalis and members of the Finance Committee, and happy holidays to everybody. I'll be presenting the fourth quarter and final amendment to the 2016 capital program this morning. My presentation will give an overview of the major funding and project changes requested by the service boards associated with this amendment. See if I can work out this slide. Gotta go back one here. Here we go. First, let's look at the proposed changes and sources of funding. To get an overall perspective of the changes requested, we have included the proposed funding changes to both the current 2016 program and the 2017-2020 out years of the program. As this chart shows at the bottom of the first column, the total funding change of the 2016 program is $136.01 million increase, highlighted in green, driven primarily by the increase of $135.66 million in CTA bonds for the Red Line Extension and Your New Blue initiatives, highlighted in green. The increase of $650,000 in service board and local funds, also highlighted in green, is comprised of the $300 million shift in federal Section 5307 funds by CTA and Metra, shown in red, and a $350,000 positive budget variance increase by PACE. As can be seen in the second half of the table, total revenues remained unchanged for the out years of the program, with just a slight shift of $23.06 million by CTA from service board and local funds, shown in red, to CTA bonds, shown in green. This slide takes the overall capital funding amendment request and breaks it down by service board. As was shown in the first slide, for 2016, the total change requested is $136.01 million. As mentioned, this is being driven by a $135.66 million funding increase for CTA, attributed to an increase in their bond sales, and a $350,000 increase for PACE in 2016, attributed to the reprogramming of positive budget variance funds. No change in funding level or proposed project was requested by Metra. For the out years of the program, again, there's no change in funding requested by any of the service boards. Next, I'll review the capital projects affected by the proposed 2016 funding changes. This slide outlines the final 2016 project changes for CTA associated with their funding increase. Projects include $70 million for the Red Line Extension Initiative, so for completion of the environmental analysis and preliminary engineering necessary for future federal New Start funding consideration, and $65.66 million for Your New Blue project for signalization work that was originally programmed to be funded with state bonds. This slide outlines PACE's final 2016 project change associated with their funding increase. The $350,000 increase in positive budget variance funding is programmed to be used to secure permanent and temporary land easements associated with construction of transit improvements and stations for PACE's Milwaukee Avenue Pulse ART Enhanced Bus Service project. This concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any related questions.
Thank you, Dave. This primarily, other than the bond, additional dollars is housekeeping that we have to go through every so often before the budget ends. Are there any questions or comments? If not, could we have a roll call?
Can we have a motion and a second?
How about a motion and a second?
Then we'll do the roll call.
All right, that sounds good. Motion by Director DeWitt, second by Director Lewis. Roll call.
Director Anderson?
Yes.
Director Buchanan?
Aye.
Director Colson?
Yes.
Director DeWitt?
Yes.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you. Item 4B is an ordinance adopting the 2017 budgets, the 2018 through 2019 financial plans, the 2017 through 2021 capital programs of the service boards and authority, and appropriating the funds for the 2017 budgets. Just before B gives you a quick overview on this, we did have a special finance meeting on November 30th. Many of the board members were here, and we had the opportunity to hear from each of the service boards, and I think they really provided great overviews of what they were trying to do within the limited funds they had, and we were able to get our many questions, I believe, answered satisfactorily at that meeting. B, would you?
That's correct, and they are all in compliance with their budget. Presenting the budget will be Bill Lackman, our manager of the budget and treasury area, and I want to thank Bill for his hard work and continued hard work. As you'll hear, we've already had a a preliminary kickoff meeting for the 2018 budget. So he'll give you a little background on that as well. Okay, Bill?
Thank you very much. Good morning. To begin my presentation, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the RTA budget staff. That includes Doug Anderson, Nora Buya, Eva De Laurentiis, and Martin Hunter, as well as to the RTA program group for their efforts on behalf of the 2017 business plan, RTA regional business plan. Working in a very compressed time frame, they successfully finessed together the many pieces of this very intricate, multidimensional financial puzzle. That said, let's start with a brief recap of the 7-month process that has led us where we are today. On May 19th, the RTA board approved and released the 2017 business plan call. The business plan call defined the information requirements that the service boards follow in the development of their 2017 business plans. The 2017 business plans include the 2017 operating budget, the 2018-2019 financial plan, and the 2017 through 2021 5-year capital program. A collaborative effort by the CTA, Metra, PACE, and RTA staff resulted in funding agreements adopted unanimously by the RTA board on August 25th, 3 weeks prior to the September 15th statutory deadline. Over the course of October and November, the RTA staff conducted a review of the proposed service board business plans and consolidated them with the proposed RTA agency business plan into the proposed regional 2017 business plan. This slide highlights the RTA 2017 budget hearing schedule. In November, the RTA CFO and Executive Director presented the regional budget to each county board. On November 2nd and 3rd, the RTA and Metra held joint public hearings throughout the RTA region. The service boards adopted their 2017 budgets and capital programs at their November board meetings. At the RTA Finance Committee meeting on November 17th, I presented the RTA 2017 agency budget. On November 30th, at the special meeting of the RTA Finance Committee, the service boards presented their budgets and fielded your questions. That evening, the RTA held its last public budget hearing here in this room. Also, throughout this period, the RTA proposed 2017 business plan has been available for review and comment on the RTA website. In all, there were 23 budget public hearings throughout the 6-county region, scheduled from October 17th through November 30th. At the RTA Special Finance Committee meeting, the RTA service boards shared an overview of the input that they received on at their public budget hearings. I'd like to express my gratitude to RTA directors McGallis, Colson, Hobson, Lewis, and Ross for attending the RTA Metra joint public hearings, and to Chairman Dillard and Director Frege for attending the RTA public budget hearing. Let's now examine the revenue side of the proposed 2017 regional operating budget. Total revenue for operations is projected at $3 billion, an increase of 2.5% from the 2016 estimate. Sales tax receipts are expected to grow by 4% to $1.3 billion and are the largest revenue component at 42% of the total. Service board operating revenue from fares and other sources are projected to grow by 2.2% to $1.2 billion and are the second largest funding component at 38%. The state's 30% public transportation match on the RTA sales tax and the real estate transfer tax, or RET, amounts to almost $400 million, or 13% of total revenue. Reimbursements from the state for debt service on strategic capital improvement, or SCIP bonds, is expected to hold steady at $130 million, or about 4% of total revenue. The real estate transfer tax levied in the City of Chicago to fund CTA operations is projected to decrease from 2016 to 65 million, or 2% of total revenues in 2017. There were more large commercial property sales in 2016 than are expected in 2017. Other revenue, including state ADA paratransit funding, federal funding for operations, and RTA agency revenue, represent about 1% of total revenue for operations of this $3 billion. As you're aware, over the last few years, the regional transit budget has been created in an atmosphere of uncertainty with respect to state funding. Thus far, we have been able to adjust to decreases in funding without impacting transit service. We certainly hope that this will be true again in 2017. If not, the RTA and the service boards will adjust their budgets as necessary. Now a look at 2017 operating expenses, which are expected to grow by 3.7% to $3 billion. Collectively, the service board's operating budgets account for more than 90% of regional expenses. CTA's operating budget comprises just over half of regional expenses, followed by Metra at 26%, PACE Suburban Service at 8%, and PACE Regional ADA Paratransit at 6%. More on each of those in a minute. RTA regional debt service of $220 million accounts for 7% of regional expenses. This amount includes principal and interest on RTA and SCIP bonds that fund service board capital projects, and interest on RTA short-term debt. The RTA issues short-term debt to manage delays in state funding, primarily PTF, which funds service board operations, and reimbursements of debt service on SCIP bonds that fund service board capital projects. RTA agency expenses of $40.9 million account for 1.4% of regional expenses. And finally, the joint self-insurance fund expenses of $6.5 million, the premium on insurance policies that cover all three service boards, represent less than 1/4% of regional expenses. Now a brief look at the service board budgets which were presented to you at the RTA Special Finance Committee on November 30th. CTA's balanced operating budget reflects an expense increase of 2.8%, just over $1.5 billion, and a recovery ratio of 54.9%, which exceeds the RTA requirement of 54.75%. Metra's budget is balanced, with revenue expected to grow by 4.4% due to a fare increase. Expenses are projected to increase by 5.2% to $781 million. The budgeted recovery ratio of 52.9% exceeds the RTA requirement of 52.5%. PACE Suburban Service operating expenses are projected to grow by 6.1% to $229 million, driven by the 2017 service expansions on I-90 and the Milwaukee Avenue Arterial Rapid Transit, or ART. The budget is balanced, and the recovery ratio of 30.3% meets the RTA requirement. The PACE ADA Paratransit budget anticipates ridership growth of 3.4%, with operating revenue expected to increase by 3.2%. Total expenses are projected to increase to $175 million, driven by both ridership growth and contractor rate expense increases. ADA Paratransit recovery ratio meets the statutory 10% requirement. Turning our attention to recovery ratios, note that each of the service board's 2017 budget recovery ratios meets or exceeds the required level adopted with the funding amounts in August. As a result, the regional recovery ratio for 2017 is budgeted at 50.2%, slightly above the 50% statutory requirement. As B mentioned before my presentation at a meeting with the Service Board CFOs earlier this week, we discussed both the thin recovery ratio margin for 2017 and the prospect for higher recovery ratios in future budget years. Our expectation is that favorable expense performance relative to budget that the service boards have experienced over the last 2 years will continue in 2017, keeping the service board recovery ratios above budget and the regional recovery ratio above the 50% statutory requirement. However, if actual results produce recovery ratios that are not in substantial accordance with budget, the RTA will request action plans from the responsible service boards. The specific revenue enhancements and or expense reductions will be determined by the responsible service boards based on the magnitude of the recovery ratio shortfalls that we might see. At the meeting, we also discussed potential increases in required service board recovery ratios to restore some cushion above 50% for 2018 and beyond. Any recovery ratio increases will be components of the 2018 funding allocation negotiations. Next, let's review the 2017 RTA Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement, or ICE program. The allocation of 2017 RTA ICE funding again followed the process initiated in budget year 2015. Annual ICE funding grows at the same rate as the RTA sales tax. So for 2017, a total of $12.8 million was allocated to the CTA, Metra, and PACE in the shares 48%, 39%, and 13% respectively. CTA proposes using ICE funding for operations to help Southside service improvements, which include increased frequency on the Green Line and 5 bus routes. Metra proposes using ICE funding for several capital projects, which include a vehicle inspection system, surveillance cameras, luminous platform signs, and a new revenue accounting system. PACE proposes using ICE funding to replace Intelligent Bus System, or IBS, equipment. Finally, a look at the capital program. The proposed 5-year capital program contains $5.1 billion of expenditures, with $1.8 billion programmed for 2017. For 2017, CTA's portion of the capital program expenditures is $1.8 billion, or 77% of the total. Metra's is $280 million, or 15%, and PACE's portion is $139 million, or 7%. For the 5-year program, CTA's portion of capital program expenditures is $3.5 billion, or 69% of the total. Metra's is $1.2 billion, or 24%, and PACE is $342 million, or 7%. Note that CTA bonds and the Transit Tax Increment Financing, or TIF initiative, provide local match for a $916 million federal core capacity grant that extends beyond the 2017-2021 capital program. These initiatives increase RTA's 2017 capital program funding by over 70% compared to CTA's 2016 capital funding. As you can see, capital funding sources also total $5.1 billion over the 5-year period. Federal funds account for $3.5 billion, or more than 2/3 of all sources of funding. Together, the RTA, CTA, and PACE are programmed to issue in excess of $600 billion in bonds to fund the 5-year capital program. New funding from the CTA Transit TIF program will help secure federal TIFIA loan or CTA bonds, and will add $622 million to the 5-year capital program for the Red-Purple Modernization Program. $281 million of other service board funds, PACE's reprogramming of $78 million of state bonds, and $34 million of ICE funding round out the 5-year capital program. At the RTA Special Finance Committee meeting, you heard from the service boards about their individual capital programs. So I'll provide a regional perspective of the projects included in the $5.1 billion 5-year program. $1.8 billion, or 36%, will be expended on rail line modernization improvements. Almost all of this amount, or $1.75 billion, is programmed for CTA's Red-Purple Modernization Program. The remaining $70 million is for continued rehabilitation work on CTA's Your New Blue initiative. Rolling stock is the second largest asset category of the 5-year capital program at $1.3 billion, or 25%. Nearly half of this amount is for the purchase and rehabilitation of Metro rail cars and locomotives. Over a third of these funds are for the rehabilitation of CTA's rail cars and buses and the start of CTA's new Series 7000 rail car purchase. The remaining funds are for the purchase of PACE buses, paratransit vehicles, and van pool vehicles. Support facilities and equipment is the third largest asset category at $418 million. At CTA, these funds will be used for system-wide facility improvements and non-revenue equipment vehicles. At Metra, these funds will be used for system-wide yard and shop improvements and the purchase of non-revenue equipment and vehicles. At PACE, these funds are for the construction of and improvements to facilities system-wide, including 2 new satellite facilities for the I-55 and I-90 express bus service. Track and structure is the fourth largest category at $264 million. More than 1/3 of this total will be used by Metra for system-wide infrastructure improvements, including the replacement of 11 bridges on the UP North Line. At CTA, these funds will support system-wide infrastructure, safety, and renewal work. Electrical and signal communications is the fifth largest asset category at $215 million. At CTA, these funds are for the replacement and upgrade of their rail power distribution and signal system and the implementation of security and communication projects system-wide. At Metra, these funds are for the continued implementation of federally mandated positive train control and system-wide improvements to their electrical and signal systems. At PACE, these funds are for the purchase and installation of an intelligent bus tracking and data collection system. In conclusion, staff recommends board adoption of the proposed operating budget and 5-year capital program as I've outlined in this presentation. The budget proposals and capital programs that are detailed in the ordinance are balanced, based on reasonable assumptions, and meet the statutory regional recovery ratio of 50%. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to address any questions.
Thank you, Bill, for that very informative overview of the budget. And certainly to be and the staff for the really good job again, and for Leanne with her leadership working with the service board directors. We've had I think, a successful budget presentation so far. During the November 30th meeting, there were, I guess, a couple key things they talked about, and you've talked about today. One was a concern about the recovery ratio. We talked about the fact that we do have a quarterly report that puts this board in a notice position, anyway, of knowing the status of the fare box recovery ratio, and gives us time to make adjustments if we have to, working with the service boards to reduce expenses to try to get the recovery ratio more on track. So hopefully we can move forward with that, and I think meeting with the staff and trying to really highlight the concern over the recovery ratio was something that needed to be done, and certainly members like Director Hopkins brought that up during the meeting. The other thing that the budget addresses, beyond so many other issues in it, the reserve policy that we've had concerns about. The boards, the service boards did submit how they were going to meet unforeseen prices if they had them. And they did it in I think, a very informative way, and in a way that gives some comfort to this board knowing how we're going to have to be able to work with them to make sure that we could come to some conclusion if we ever needed additional funds. So I think that was covered well. When asking each of the service boards what their biggest concern was with the budget they submitted, unanimously it's capital, needing additional revenue for capital. They highlighted that. Our chairman was here at that meeting, trying to emphasize the need to have state capital funding and certainly additional federal funding. But that was pretty much uniform throughout the whole, all three service boards. One other concern, I guess, as we continue to look at capital and how we're funding it through more bond issues. And with more bond issue becomes more debt, and more debt eats up more of the capital resources that you have that goes toward that bond. And Director Colson brought that up at the meeting, and I think it's a good point and something that Bill and Dee, we ought to really take a look at, the amount of debt that each of the agencies are accumulating and what percent that is of that capital, and really, what do we need to do to look at that a little bit closer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I think obviously the way the budget's submitted meets the state statute as far as all the tests that we have to subject the budgets to as far as revenues, expenses, and so forth. But just on an ongoing basis, we've had to, as the CTA said, if we don't fund it through bonds, the capital's not going to happen right now. So, and we understand the need, but just we ought to try to keep a little bit more of an eye on that, I guess. And as far as unusual approaches toward bringing dollars to the system, I think the CTA has a great one, and that's a TIF district that they've created to help fund capital. And I think it's an innovative way of looking at if you got a certain project that is unique to a corridor like that one. I thought that was an excellent way of going about trying to deal with that. It helps an entire system from a revenue standpoint, revenue that they generate on their own from that service area. So that was something innovative and something that, again, I'd like to learn more about that, Bill and Bea, about how other agencies have used districts like that to fund capital expansions and so forth. So anyway, that's just an overview of comments that I had, and I'd like to open it up to questions of the other members. Yes, Director Tarani.
I wasn't at the November 30th meeting, and it sounds like this might have been discussed, but Bill, if I understood you correctly today, you said that if the recovery ratio didn't get better in terms of that narrow margin, you would then ask for action plans, and how, aren't we there? I mean, shouldn't these action plans be, shouldn't we have some action plans being implemented right now?
Well, with 20, we've just looked at where we are today on 2016, right? And we saw that the recovery ratio for the region was about 50.5%. No, so the budget shows that we'll be at 50.2 for next year, right? And just like we monitor, the revenue and expenses of the service boards every month and present them to you. I mean, we do have a budget. It does budget at 50.2, and we expect that we will meet it based on the revenues and expense forecasts that the service boards provided. I mean, we did start on Monday talking to the service boards about 2018, and I have to say, we've never started talking about the following year budget before you guys have passed, right, the upcoming budget. So, we've started early.
Just to clarify, but the the dashboard that I just reported on showed the actual recovery ratio at 51.5 through the month of October, and we budgeted 50.5 through the month of October, so we're actually up by 1%. But you're right. I mean, I'm not saying that's a big cushion. We'd love to see that be between 1% and 2%. And so we're going to be monitoring, and I report monthly on the recovery ratio. We don't have to wait till the quarter, and so we would go back, and we've already talked to them about it. In a way, they already have the plans. It's increasing revenues or cutting their expenses. I mean, there's only those two things. should things happen with the reduced fare reimbursement, let's say we don't get that all, we don't want to plan for that, we would also think about going to the state and asking for some relief on the recovery ratio, because if we're supposed to get 34 million and we're only getting 17 million, that's an opportunity to consider doing that. And we would come to the board as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hopkins.
We used to be at 56% in terms of the recovery ratio. So something, we've changed the way we've done business, or we as the RTA or collectively with the service boards are accepting a lower recovery ratio, and it's been progressively lower and lower and lower each year. What have we changed in terms of our method of doing business that's allowed this recovery ratio to drop by 6 points?
So we prepared history of recovery ratio, right? And I think we presented that at some point. It's all part of the negotiations. I mean, the service boards, we don't dictate their fares to them, right? Certainly, we have to require them to meet the recovery ratio, but they know their price points better than we do. And, you know, we will encourage them, we will continue to encourage them to look at their fares, but we also need to be cognizant of what the market will bear. There's a lot of competition out there. I mean, look what's happening to the ridership. As we look at that, many of them will say that increases in fares will drive their ridership down. So we work with them. I mean, our job is to meet that regional recovery ratio of at least 50%. But I can't speak to over the years. I'm sure it was all negotiations.
Director Lewis.
Bill, in the debt service, when you did the expenses that were just under $3 billion, you had a RTA debt service number in there for about 7%. Does that include the service agency's debt service numbers as well as just RTA?
That's just the RTA's debt service for, basically for capital projects at the service boards.
Where's the number for the service boards? Where's their debt service?
It is it's within their individual budgets.
Okay. It might be interesting just to see how much that is to basically kind of identify what their cost is, because we know what the RTA's is, but it'd be nice to break that out.
Okay.
My second question goes to Leanne. I know we had a series of meetings for budget hearings around, the area, but the attendance was very low. I know the one I went to, there was hardly anybody there. Is it necessary, is it required that we have so many budget hearings when there's not much participation from the public? Is there a way to consolidate it to really take demands off staff for having to go out and be there for meetings that are pretty sparsely attended?
So, yeah, for the budget. So we aren't actually required to do as many as we do by the letter of the law. However, we have sort of made a committed effort to being sort of out across the region. Technically, for the budget, we are only required to have one public hearing. However, we do have to have hearings on for the capital program across the entire region. So we sort of have just rolled them all up together. With that being said, though, you're exactly right. I think sort of the day, and this is a conversation that we at the staff level with the service boards have sort of been having, and it probably is reaching a peak at this point. The day and the time of people coming out to public hearings, even when someone has a fare increase, sort of seem to have gone. There are many other ways that people would prefer to communicate. And we didn't rely on just getting feedback and putting our information out just by the public hearings. We had it on our website. We actually had a webinar basically running that anyone could click on, run through the whole presentation that was narrated through that, and then provide email feedback and comments. So we continue to look to other ways, but there has been some conversation about, do we sit down with Springfield, because some of this is statutorily required, and think about other more current ways and more effective ways of communicating and getting feedback.
I would encourage that, only in that, as I said, I've attended for the last couple of years, and it's been sparsely attended, if at all, and so I don't know if it has much of an impact. And if there's a better way, it certainly takes some of the burden off of staff as well as others to find a more effective way to do that.
It's great bonding between staff and the service boards and our board member that attends.
Other questions or comments about the budget? Yes, Director Ross.
I'd just like to compliment the staff for having this stuff on the web. I watched the November 30th meeting over the web. I wish there was some way the technology would allow us to to do the phone in and see the technology, without the time delay. That would be helpful. I don't know if
That
that
would
day
be.
will ever come, but that would be nice. But it was great to be able to watch all three of those presentations online.
Yeah, we're working on that real-time kind of live view thing too.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? If not, could we have a motion to approve? Motion by Director Tarani, second by Director Melvin. Roll call.
Director Anderson.
Yes.
Director Buchanan.
Aye.
Director Colson. Director DeWitt.
Yes.
Director Lewis.
Yes.
Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Triani.
Aye.
Director McGallis.
Aye.
8 ayes.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the committee? If not, motion to adjourn. Motion by Director Tarani, second by Director Lewis. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Nays. Ayes have it. Committee's adjourned.